There's one thing we certainly know about the current Tory party. They govern themselves into a crisis, and then they can't govern themselves out of the paper bag that they govern themselves into. Um, it's a well and truly complete mess. The housing crisis is one such example. We've never had a housing minister last longer in post than 6 to 12 months. And you wonder why we're in a housing crisis. And unfortunately, um, this is going to be the next crisis. We are going to walk into an education crisis, not only with the fact that it was brought up on Newsnight very recently. One of the, I think it was the NUS, or it was at least one of the teacher unions, one of the members was there last night, pointing this out. Next year's intake of trainer teachers is barely even filling the numbers for recruitment. I think they were talking like there's only like 15 physics teachers, 133 maths teachers, which only fills like 2% of the requirement. And you've got a situation where teachers, or at least retaining teachers or new teachers, is an incredibly hard prospect for the industry to do. I know a lot of teachers, sort of personally, in my life, and I know someone who was a teacher and they left because the stress and the amount of stuff that they have to deal with is just unbelievable. But this is again just how the situation has become, and we could see a situation where we just do not have enough teachers available. And of course, you've got to add the pandemic on top of that as well, that is affecting sort of students' mental health there, and has left them behind in terms of being able to catch up. It has only widened the gap between the more wealthy areas and the less well ones, surprising no one. And we talked about, especially during the pandemic, where this was put forward of, well, let's give each student a set amount of money to be able to sort of for the schools to be able to spend. And you look at, I think it's the Netherlands that also did this as well. I think other countries did it as well, but I think it was the Netherlands that we were talking about at the time. And the Netherlands gave something like, I think it was like £3,000 per pupil. I think something like that. It might have been a bit less, but I'm just trying to remember it now, but I can't. And then ours was something like £800. No, it was £1,200 or something like that per pupil. And that, in terms of helping the students be able to catch up for their missed lessons during the pandemic, is nothing. And it's going to cause an even bigger crisis in education. And I think in today's story here, you are seeing the ex-czar of in the education department absolutely fuming at the way that the government has sort of responded to this, the way it is not helping students. And we are walking into yet another crisis caused, surprisingly, of course, by the Conservative government again. So it's something else that probably the Labour government is certainly going to have to sort out. Surprising no one. So let's get into sort of his comments on what he had to say about this certainly coming crisis in education. But before we do that, please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help support the channel that way. And of course, there is the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there is the YouTube subscription thing where you get all sorts of little bells, whistles, and badges and whatnot that you can use on YouTube. So over to The Guardian then, with their story on this. The ex-Tsar, angry at neglect of pupils in England, left behind in the pandemic. The former Education Recovery Commissioner, Sir Kevin Collins, has accused the government of burying its head in the sand over the loss of learning amongst children in England due to COVID, warning that the problem will just not go away. He's expressed regret about the lost opportunities after the government rejected his ambitious £15 billion plan for recovery, including extending the school day for all, and wanted the flagship National Tutoring Programme, or the NTF, was in danger of becoming little more than a few kids in the corner doing a bit of tutoring. Speaking a year after the COVID restrictions were finally lifted on what the government called Freedom Day, Collins voiced concerns about the tax cuttings arms race in the Conservative leadership contest, in which he warned that the resulting cuts to education spending. Collins resigned from his job as education catch-up czar in June of last year in protest at the Prime Minister's decision to scale back recovery plans, warning that the new offer did not even come close to meeting the needs of children whose education was thrown into chaos by the pandemic. The government has so far pledged around £5 billion in catch-up of school funding for college and for colleges. So think about that. 15 billion he wanted to put forward. And how much did the government put forward? 5 billion. This is the classic Tory government strategy. Oh, we've got this problem that we need to solve. Oh, we need to spend, we need to spend 15 billion if we're really going to sort of tackle this problem seriously. And then all of a sudden the Tories come back and go, here's 5 billion. Well, no, we need more than that. Else it's not going to solve the problem. It's going to make problems worse. And it's funny where we see Tories constantly talking about we want this high skills economy. You cannot have a high skills economy if you are failing to educate people to be in that high skills economy. Anyway, in an interview with The Guardian, Collins said that he remained convinced that the country was uninvesting in education overall, and warned that the evidence emerging in recent months about the impact of the lost learning suggests that the NTP, set up with great fanfare to help the left behind children to catch up, was not being delivered, saying, I worry we're into that don't mention the war, don't mention COVID. Let's just pretend that we can put it all behind us. Let's put our head in the sand. And we won't wash because the impact of this is not going to go away unless we do something about it. We're letting down a generation of children if we don't do that, he said. The delivery of the NTP, which has been led by the Dutch HR giant Randstad this year, has been widely criticised with the low participation rates in some areas of the country. And as a result, the Department of Education has announced that all funding will go direct to schools next year so that they can arrange their own tuition, a move welcomed by head teachers. On the risk of tax cuts promised by various contenders in the Tory party leadership race, Collins warned of the restraint on spending on public services, including education, an area that is, quote, not fat. Speaking of his own time dealing with the Treasury, he said that the Department of Education spending as something to control rather than the core to long-term investment. I was given lots of encouragement. I was being told to be ambitious by number 10 people, including the Prime Minister. But it was the Treasury where the breaks came in, he said, calling the thinking a false economy. And you can tell that, obviously, that was Rishi Sunak. Remember, we've had 3 years where we could have seriously invested in this country. If Boris Johnson actually followed through on a lot of these plans he had done, they would have actually had some sort of positive impact. But of course, as we said at the time, don't believe the hype. We've been here before with many previous Tory governments of, oh yes, we're going to spend all this money. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to spend, again, like this. So we're going to spend 15 billion on education. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be great. And then, of course, when it comes to the actual putting up for the money, that's when sort of the purse strings, snap shut. And instead of the promised money needed to fulfill these projects, it's barely just enough to get a project started. It's crumbs when people need a proper substantial meal. Anyway, he continues. Every piece of evidence indicates that the investment I was asking for was tiny compared to the long-term hit if people lose earning power and economic productivity. Again, he's right there. He added, I'm incredibly disappointed, and there is an anger because our children and our schools deserve more. You've got children who have never had any time in reception or in early years. That's a big part of your life missing. Huge rites of passage are missing. Your prom all missed. All in long term, they matter. They've got then all you've got is children that didn't sing in a choir for 2 years, or didn't take up a musical instrument or play sports. They're reluctant to now to even go back to those things. So we've seen a drop off in those activities. And again, that's going to be a huge impact. A huge impact. What's the government response? Nothing. So Collins had hoped that the high-quality, well-trained tutors and tutoring, which had been shown to make a difference to outcomes, would become the new arm of the education system available to everyone, rather than just for a few better off. And of course, the end part is just the Department of Education's response, and it's generally just pathetic. But yeah, we're walking into another crisis. Trust me, in a year's time, we're going to start talking about an education crisis. And again, this was caused very much by COVID. This was caused very, very much by, again, conservative austerity and then doubling down on austerity, and now potentially looking at even tripling down on austerity. I've talked before about, the term austerity on steroids. This is really it, and this is the consequence. And you affect hundreds of thousands of people's potential, their education, their earning power. It has a massive impact on people's futures and lives. And if you are not educating people at a young age, then how on earth can you have this so-called high skills economy when you aren't equipping the future workers to be able to work in this economy? It just doesn't make any economic sense. The more you spend in education, the greater the return on investment. And yet, Tories, the ones who are always talking about we're the proper guardians of economic prosperity. We know what to invest in. We know where the cuts and what to properly invest in. And yet, education, soon to be sort of the UK's new crisis. So watch out for that. Probably happening very soon, if not already at the moment. So as always, thank you very much for watching. Please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.